Right about now, you are listening to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, a show where we discuss living as a leader worth following, leading others to do the same, and in doing so, leaving a legacy for future generations. My name is Jimmie Gonzalez Jr., a learning and development professional and leadership coach, sitting down with my co-host, Anthony Devon Watts Jr., an expert contact center leader that has effectively led and developed dynamic teams with high motivation. Together, we have over 30 years experience in the corporate game. Join us as we discuss our growth as leaders, share the lessons we've learned, and interview others to see how their leadership style was shaped as they were mentored by adversity. Legacy leaders, welcome to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, presented to you by the Legacy Leadership Learning Group. This is a show where we teach you what it takes to live as a leader worth following. As an entrepreneur, small business owner, how do you lead others to do the same? And in doing so, leave a legacy for generations to come. I am Jimmie Gonzalez, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Devon Watts. And we definitely have a special guest with us as well, Shannon Martin. This is our first, or really our second installment of our MBA series, which is Mentored by Adversity. But the first time for season 2 that we've actually been able to have a guest with us. So we're definitely excited to have her here, and we're going to jump in just learning more about herself, what she does specifically, and of course ask her about her leadership style and how it was developed, through any adversity that she may have gone through in her life as well. If you're a loyal listener or if you're new to the podcast, please feel free to rate and review this podcast. We sincerely appreciate that. And if you're watching us on YouTube, we'd love for you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And as always, share with another leader that you know can benefit from these conversations. So we're going to jump right into, again, our interview and our session with Shannon herself. Shannon Martin is the Director of Communications at Podbean and also Easy Living, who loves exploring the word and, of course, listening to podcasts. And again, we're very excited to have her with us today. So welcome, Shannon. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great.
Awesome. So we were luckily enough to kind of get hooked up with you because you were reaching out to me via LinkedIn about me being a learning and development professional and how I could use podcasts and specifically the Podbean platform to help within my learning and development space and help my company to further our efforts using podcasts specifically. And then within that conversation, finding out that we actually had started a podcast maybe a couple of months prior to that interaction and through Podbean specifically. And again, we're just very excited to be able to get to know you a little bit better and continue to learn more about podcasting, and specifically podcasting from a corporate perspective, but also learning from you about how you've seen the industry develop, how companies have used podcasting again to further and enhance their learning experiences within a corporate environment. So this is going to be part 1. We want to definitely get to know Shannon more personally and professionally as well. But we promise you guys is we're going to have a part 2 where we're going to dive more into, again, that corporate perspective and really learning about how you, as a learning and development specialist or a director or leader of a learning and development team, how you can really use podcasting as an extension and an enhancement to your learning and development strategy for your company. But again, this particular part 1 is really going to be more about learning more about Shannon herself. So we can start there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you personally and professionally?
Sure. Well, I am a traveler of the world, an explorer, I guess. I've been living overseas from the U.S. originally, but I've been living overseas about 10 years. Wow. In a couple of different locations. And so I started being an explorer at an early age through books and then later podcasts. And of course, over the last year or so, that's been the main way I've been traveling through books and podcasts. Although I did have move from one country to another country to another country due to the pandemic. But that's really kind of how I would describe myself. And so my husband and I have been living overseas. It's the two of us. And come from the East Coast of the U.S. And I've been lucky to live on 3 continents and just love getting to know different cultures and, continuing to just explore different ways. So that's the personal side. The business side is I have a very varied background, like a lot of people do. But I work currently in communications for Podbean, which is wonderful, working with podcasters in all different kinds of ways, both kind of the larger podcasting community and then this internal piece, corporate podcasting. And I also work for a company called Easy Living, as you mentioned, where I do basically the educational resources for the company, the blogging and that kind of stuff. So my background is actually, I'm with that company because I have a master's in social work and gerontology. And so in that kind of writing and communications, I'm really using that schooling and that background. And then I got more into doing communications and that bit of it over time. And so kind of went a little more in that direction. And then so the Podbean side is a bit different. So it's kind of nice. The diversity of what I deal with on a day-to-day basis is quite different.
Absolutely. Well, I can imagine being an avid traveler. Obviously, this past year has definitely been a bit of a hindrance for sure, but I know that you're probably looking forward to getting back out there. I guess the real $1 million question for somebody that is an avid traveler is, which do you prefer the most about the traveling experience? Is it the sightseeing or is it the food eating?
Oh, it's 100% the food eating. There's not even a doubt about it. I didn't know what 2 things you were going to say, but as soon as I heard food, it's the food, definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'm happily back in my sort of adopted home of Spain, where I actually absolutely adore the food. But I've been lucky. I lived in China. That's another amazing food place. Traveled all around Southeast Asia. Japan's one of my favorites for eating. So yeah, it's just and it was nice. We were sort of stuck back in the U.S. this year, but it was also nice because we got to have some of our old favorites. And I'm from Maryland, and it's like crabs. Shrimp, good old Bay seasoning. So it was nice.
No, you're talking my language. You're about to make this a food podcast. Just about eating. No, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that, and you having the opportunity to travel around, man, and just get a diversity of taste. So I guess kind of the next question, just thinking about your personal likes, but also your professional professional space you work in, is like, how are you managing to balance it all? I imagine with such supporting such a diverse community of creators and podcasters, and you have kind of the general podcast community plus also the internal, and having us being creators ourselves, we know that creators and podcasters are just a little bit different. So I'd imagine being able to balance it all. I'm just curious, how are you managing that? How do you manage to balance that personal and professional?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have it perfectly down. I would say that is something I continue to struggle with. I am a person that works a little too much sometimes, for sure. I'm one of these people that have been working sort of from home or remotely for the most part for the better part of 15, maybe almost 20 years. So I'm a real independent worker. I always think, I don't know, I'm not sure if I could do it if I had to go back and work full time in an office. I mean, there's some fun parts, but I'm so used to being so sort of independent, still working with teams, and sort of being able to do things on my own schedule and that kind of stuff. Being able to be very efficient. So that helps me. It kind of works well for me to be able to work a bit around my schedule and know my times when I'm really efficient, and so I can blast out a whole bunch of work and to kind of balance that out a bit. Now, having moved now, I'm dealing with different time zones, so I'm relearning that a bit. How to now I'm doing more things in the evening because I'm dealing with a lot of people in the U.S. and I'm ahead. So now, but my really efficient time is in the morning, but it kind of works out well because I can write a lot and do those kind of things that you really can just pump out a lot, and then do calls and things when I might be a little more, winding down. So yeah, I try to do that. I've tried to really be better about boundary setting with my weekends and things like that. I think, I don't know, a lot more people are used to working at home now, but when in the early days of working from home, people would always say, "Oh, how do you get anything done? Don't you always just want to, take a nap or whatever?" And I would say that if you work from home, you'll soon learn that's not the problem. The problem is the opposite. The problem is when you disappear down the hallway and your spouse says, "Are you working back there? I thought we were going to have dinner. What are you doing?" So I've definitely had some time, under my belt to kind of, see the downsides of that and try to fix it and try to get better with it. And so I think I find a better balance now. For me, physical activity is hugely important. And especially during this pandemic, thank goodness, I've always been places where I've still been able to get outside and do walks. But I also started doing a lot more yoga because I was like, okay, if I am trapped in the house, something I can do with some videos on YouTube. And that's a must for me every day. That's a priority, must happen. I must do, physical activity. And if I can get out and do some of that in nature, then that's kind of my preference as well.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate a couple of things that you mentioned in terms of like how you're balancing both professional and personal. One, like a lot of our guests, we all are humble enough to acknowledge that we haven't found that right balance yet, but it is something that we work towards and we aspire to for sure. Mm-hmm. I think your experience is definitely unique because everybody else is going through that learning curve, at least the majority of folks that have not worked remotely and then we were thrust into working remotely. They're going through the same learning curve that you've gone through over the past 15 years of just really trying to find that balance. Because I was actually reading something that was saying that, and obviously I believe this to be 1,000% true, but, folks working remotely actually end up putting in more time. Like, whatever misnotion existed that like, people who work at home, like, they're coasting, they're watching TV, watching Netflix, relaxing, taking a nap. Like, it's the furthest thing from the truth. It's like you're perpetually working, and so you have to figure out how to strike that right balance and be firm and draw those lines in the sands. But the biggest thing that I love is something that we've talked about quite a bit on the podcast for our leaders is the need to sharpen your saw and to make sure that you're taking care of just kind of your physical, your spiritual, your mental, all of those things, right? And the passion in which you stress, like, I have to get my yoga time in, I have to get my walking time, that is non-negotiable. Like, that's the type of passion that we like our leaders to have when we're talking about protecting just your physical well-being and making sure that you're sharp and ready to perform. So I really appreciate you kind of sharing that with our audience and reinforcing some of the things we've been trying to deliver over these past couple of episodes now. I don't know if anything else stood out to you, Jimmie.
No, same points. I mean, again, I was thinking that what you just mentioned about sharpening your saw and loving the emphasis that you put. It's just right in line with things that we continuously talk about, that we live ourselves, we believe. We've had a number of conversations over the first month or so, especially in January, just about the need to take care of yourself and setting goals for a number of things in your life, but especially from that physical perspective, because we had certain goals that we set. But it's, for that energy perspective, from the mental perspective, from the confidence, doing those things to take care of yourself are so important. And I definitely we have talked about naps. But actually, in a good way, taking advantage of naps, and not too long, but making take a 20-minute power nap. If I was going to have a 20-minute break, I'd rather go take a 20-minute power nap if I really felt like I needed it to recharge myself and continue to do what I needed to do, especially from a creative perspective, for the rest of the day. So, no, definitely on point, and again, right in line with a lot of our beliefs and teachings, that we have within our podcast, and just again things that we've been living for years in our own personal life.
Absolutely.
So, Shannon, from a leadership perspective, really thinking about your career, what you've been able to experience over the years, for you, what was the moment that you knew or that you felt that leadership was your calling, or it was at least a large part of the role that you were going to play in your community, from a work perspective, or even just personally within your life?
Yeah, I don't think I had a moment. I think it's kind of evolved because I've never been looking at a position with like a certain title per se. I've always, as I mentioned, worked at smaller companies, and so I often have a fairly impressive title, but it's a company of, it's not I'm over thousands of people or something, and so I wasn't climbing the corporate ladder per se. So it was kind of an interesting type of leadership where I kind of did what was necessary. I had to pick up a lot of different skills, and I was attracted to that because that's kind of always what I've gravitated towards. I didn't really know that, but I can see now that I really liked that opportunity at smaller companies, and working pretty much the bulk of the work I've done the last couple of years. I'm working directly with the CEO, the owner, mostly family run or small businesses. So I kind of, evolved in that way. I think one time that it might have kind of struck me that there was something about leadership in my world was when a number of years ago at Easy Living, but it's actually two companies that merged, so it was called Aging Wisely at that time. My boss and my direct boss and the owner of the company had both gone through the leadership program, like you have leadership Tampa Bay or leadership Pinellas. I was in Pinellas County, and they nominated me, or I can't remember exactly how it works for that. And I was like, oh, leadership, okay. And I was doing a lot of things with local nonprofits and getting on more committees and things. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm evolving into leading, I guess. So I think that really struck me, and that was a great learning experience because you go out and you learn about a lot of different aspects of your community, and you interact with a lot of other leaders, and so it really broadened my world a lot and really reinforced to me the importance. What I was doing, I think that was really developing me into a leader was, developing different skills and doing what it takes, but also being a connector. So I was always this person. I sort of was doing marketing, so I kind of had to be. I was out in the community having lunches with people, and but then I would, this charitable cause is coming up. That would be perfect, and this skill set would work well there. And what can we do to, get donations for this? And who do you need to know? And that kind of stuff. And that. When I went through that leadership program, it reinforced that even more because I thought, look at all these great people that I'm getting to know and to meet, and there's not a barrier to that. There's no reason why there ever has to be that kind of barrier. You can ask, you can reach out to a CEO, you can take on these different roles. And I had a colleague at that same company who he came into it was part of the family, and he came into the leadership, and he was one of the youngest presidents of the local chamber. I mean, he was in his, I think, early 20s. So it's kind of surrounded by good mentors as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think about, and we've often had those conversations. I think very rarely, right, is it kind of that one moment in time. But we asked the question because we do like to hear kind of about that origin story, of our guests and the people that we bring on to conversate with and learn more about their leadership journey, because it really is a journey and evolving into kind of that purpose and what you were put here to do and to be from a leadership perspective. And it is very important, from when you think about attributes, that you mentioned that ability to connect. So there was two things that you said that really stood out to me. The ability to connect with others is definitely needed as a leader. And I think from what you described is also resourcefulness. It's one, knowing a myriad of skills and kind of tasks and things that you can do to be able to help a team to develop. And then again, being resourceful enough to know that, I'm going to be able to connect with different people. I'm going to be able to network. I'm going to be able to find the information that I need to develop this idea, to do this project, to raise funds, whatever, again, that goal or that task is that you have. Those are very, very important attributes that, any of us as a leader would love to have or continue to develop within ourselves to build our kind of our toolbox of what we have, to be able to be successful as a leader, especially if we're looking to develop others.
Yeah, and I think that I didn't really realize it until I was thinking through this, but my personal life really intersects with that too, because I didn't realize earlier last year we were talking to one of our relatives about what we were doing in order to make because we got kind of stuck, away from where home was at the time, but we had a plan to go somewhere else, but we were going through all these bureaucratic steps of getting our visa and our residency in a new country and organizing things. And I'm so kind of so used to that at this point that I didn't really. She's like, "How are you doing all that? How do you know what to do?" And when you said that about resourcefulness and knowing how to find, I am really good now at finding those Facebook groups about that place and deciding when I need to hire someone to do this piece of it, because it's not going to make sense for me to learn it for 90 hours, and what's important, what's not important, what to kind of worry about and what not to. So moving different places around the world, and even in the U.S., having lived in different places, it's a similar skill set. It really taught me that making connections, asking for help, being able to find resources, it's huge. And it to me, it was kind of just normal. And when she said that, I thought, oh, yeah, I guess it actually does take some skills.
Absolutely. Having like us recently, we didn't travel across the country, right? We went 2.5 hours south from Orlando here to Boca, but in the middle of the pandemic and just trying to coordinate all those things and like trying to find a property but not being able to physically see it absolutely requires some skills. So I can see why they would have an appreciation for your resourcefulness. And really what I appreciate, just kind of about what you shared and your leadership journey is it really highlights, or to me, highlights and spotlights the role that small businesses play in our communities, right? And you talked about like plugging into the community. You talked about your affinity for working with smaller organizations, like close to the owner, close to the CEO. And while that does lend itself to some pretty impressive titles, even if you're only overseeing, 5 or 100, right? But it also lends itself to some pretty impressive or accelerated impact that you can have on the business, on the community, on the role within the community. And I just love that, because we often feel like Jimmie and I were just having this discussion that the small business community, the small business owner, is often a community that's not necessarily completely addressed or spoken to, right? I think a lot of times when we think about leadership, we immediately associate, climbing the corporate ladder and working for a major, Fortune 100 company and going from, mail clerk to, office of the CEO. But the folks that have the biggest impact and are able to make the biggest difference on their community is really a lot of these small businesses that are plugged in and connecting. And whether it's nonprofits, whether it's for-profit, whether it's government entities, like this ecosystem, right, that we end up calling the community. And so I appreciate how even throughout your career, like that's been one of the through lines, where whether you were working directly with small businesses or even in your role right now with Podbean and, kind of the offering, it is geared toward helping small businesses grow, this new small business community of content creators or people who have traditional businesses and they need to get training and communication out. Like you're still serving those individuals, and I just think that's really, really awesome and impressive to see, kind of your career trajectory.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
So, talking about your leadership journey, who are some of the people that you've learned from along the way that have helped you to inspire you, to mentor you, and just help you grow as a leader? And what are some things that they taught you along the way?
Yeah, I think I've been lucky to have really good bosses. And and as I said, working directly with people that own the company most of the time, so they're always super impressive, because you guys know, working with small businesses and entrepreneurs, people are dynamos. I mean, they're just amazing. So my boss that I kind of worked a little more directly with, but she's the one that founded the company Easy Living, but it was Aging Wisely initially, Linda Chamberlain. She's an elder law attorney, just a great person, and started, was an elder law attorney, did elder law, started this company that did elder care management, and then branched into home care, and then merged the two companies. And she still does elder law, and just really involved with a lot of things within the community as well. So she was great and got me involved in doing Leadership Pinellas along with my direct boss at that time. and just really, I would say what I've learned from her has been seeing someone do a small business with a lot of integrity, where that integrity is always kind of the key thing. And then now I work mostly with her son, who runs the company, and carries that forward in terms of one of our obviously we work with the elderly, so of course we want to have a lot of integrity in serving the client and giving back to the community, but he's very focused on serving the employee, because this is an employee that is not always treated great, that is, making a lower wage than a lot of people, struggling, especially during the pandemic, having to work in, really tough situations, and, really has, had a lot of challenges in that labor force over the years. So he really put a lot of things into place in how we develop our employees, that we actually do develop our employees, because in that industry, when we started out, we paid people for training time, which you guys are probably like, of course. In that industry, you didn't do that. They had to come with their own training, and if they needed to do continuing education or something, they had to do it on their own time. And it wasn't provided by the company for the most part. And my boss was like, this is not the right way to develop people. And we want to see them also move on and succeed and go to nursing school and do other great things. We never are trying to hold them back. So that's been really, instrumental. I think that, those bosses. And then my current boss at Podbean, also David, seeing a different perspective of it, where he's more of a tech guy. And so it's kind of cool seeing how the technical mindset works in terms of innovation and working. I've worked a lot more directly with the technical team and seeing them sort of iterate things and, we'll try this out and we'll test this, and we're not always worried about, is this, I'm marketing oriented. So it's like, well, how are we going to make money out of that thing? They're like, well, we'll worry about that later. We just know the creators want it. And if they're saying they want it, it's a good thing. We'll do it. We can provide it. And cool things like that. So, just a different, perspective on, things from that technical, moving forward and innovation perspective, which I think is really fun. And so, at Podbean, the other thing has been the customers, the creators, to me have been huge mentors, because people are doing amazing things and putting out amazing work, often as a hobby, sometimes related to a business, and just being really creative and interesting with it. So I've gotten to know some really cool people that way.
That's awesome.
So specifically, obviously, this particular session, right? We call it Mentored by Adversity. So we're curious to learn if you can tell us about a time that you were faced with adversity in your life, and you were called to kind of lead through this tough time, this adverse time. What did that look like, and how were you able to get through that moment in time?
Yeah, one that comes to mind, I was thinking career-wise, not necessarily personally. And so one that came to mind, and especially being early in my career, was that when I was out of graduate school, I worked in a nursing home, a nursing facility. I was director of social services and admissions. So I was doing sort of a marketing piece, or I guess you call it a marketing piece, and then all the social services for this 200-bed facility, 200. And that was also where I learned balance and what not to do, because I pretty much just drove myself into a wall by just doing everything. And that kind of work, it's very personal. It's very life and death sometimes. And I realized I needed to be a little more removed. So I liked sort of the admissions piece, but the being there and being really involved with patients and families every day, I couldn't leave it behind. So that was a learning piece personally. But we had an incident where we actually had someone get accused of abusing a resident, which is, again, that's where I couldn't sleep at night, and all of that. But it was a good, obviously huge adversity to deal with in terms of just something horrific happening, but also then from the perspective of the families and the PR of it all, kind of, and how to resolve it and what had happened, and the media, was there getting involved and stuff. So we had a administrator who I really saw a lot of mentoring from in terms of how she dealt with it and how she really was very transparent with it, but also like very, very strong and very careful with her messaging. I'd say probably the biggest thing I walked away from with that was about communication. It was probably why I went in this direction of doing things in communications, because I saw how important it was to be able to respond to the media, and especially, more importantly, really, that's the PR piece, but more importantly to the families and their concerns, and to address it and to figure out how we're going to, prevent and move forward and those kind of things. So I really learned I've always been a communicator, but it really reinforced how vital the communication was, and how really it all kind of boiled down to that in the end. And I guess that job taught me that in a lot of ways, because I found I loved doing the admissions, because families would come in, and of course no one wants to ever have to put a loved one in a nursing home. It's like, it's not a plus. They're not coming in to look for like their next dream home.
Right.
It's not showing them, oh, look at this beautiful dream home. No, it's a necessity. And so I learned, the fine art of listening to them, and then also trying to bring together a team and communicate well. So someone new is coming into the facility. I found that, for example, that's the hardest possible time when they're coming in that first day, and the impression that you leave with the family in particular, or the elder person themselves. And a lot of times there wasn't a system for communicating, so that every department knew about this person, knew what they needed to know, that we had kind of a checklist of what to do. There was none of that when I got there, and you need systems in place for that kind of stuff, so that you can communicate well, and so that someone doesn't feel like they're just an afterthought. I learned a lot from that job. That was really helpful, but especially that horrible experience that just, it was something that you just never want at any company. You never want that kind of bad incident to occur, but I don't know that there could be a worse one, than that kind of thing. So it just, being able to also put yourself in the shoes of people that were involved, and the family members, and it's not just the person that directly affected, but it's all those other family members that now have this nightmare of worry on their hands. And it's not even just at our facility. It starts to make people worry that are, out in the community, and yeah.
Wow, I really appreciate you sharing that. This is what I really love about this segment of our podcast series as a whole. Is not only do you get to hear people's stories, but you really start to piece together the journey and the experiences that kind of led them to where they're currently at. And whether it's the example you provided now, or the example you provided around mentorship that you received, and working with small businesses, like the two things that consistently come up in all of your experiences and makes complete sense why you're at where you're at right now is the importance of communication and connection. Right? You talk about connecting to community. You talk about, even in this example, valuing the connection of that family and trusting you with their loved one's care, understanding the communication that's necessary in order to ease that transition as much as possible, and then realizing when something goes wrong, right, the impact that can have on the connection again with the community, connection with those loved ones, the connection with the rest of the industry, and how communication can be the bridge in order to address some of those things and ease some of those things. So it's not a surprise that now, in your capacity, as director of communications at Podbean, right, you're working with creators, you're working with content creators and small businesses on those two things, like delivering on those two things, being able to connect and being able to communicate. So it's just really, really awesome to take a step back and be able to witness that. And I appreciate you just being transparent with us about how impactful that experience was on you.
Absolutely. So that was actually a good way to kind of really just sum up the conversation as a whole, because those were some things that I got, from just listening to you again, just really breaking down for us your journey and for our legacy leaders out there. I love what you said, Devon, about connection, and the resourcefulness piece that we talked about earlier, communication, connection, and then just being resourceful. For you, Shannon, what are some words of advice that you would share with our legacy leaders out there, or aspiring, leaders today about leadership?
Well, I've got to emphasize communication again. I actually have a quote on my LinkedIn banner that I was redoing that to make my LinkedIn, more interesting and stuff a while back. And I was like, oh, I'm going to, put this one picture of me I was in a movie about podcasting actually. So it's the picture of me, from the movie. And, so I found this quote, which is, "The art of communication is the language of leadership." So it's perfect for this situation. So that would
gold nuggets.
Yeah, I forget the guy's name. I'll have to tell you guys later for your show notes or whatever. Because I didn't make the quote. And I think the other piece which crosses over between my personal and professional lives is that I think it's important to always be learning and developing yourself, and be that, learning different things in the company. I mean, even as simple as like with Podbean, what I always love is because we're always developing new technology and innovating, there's always something new to learn in that regard, and just simply learning what's new with our platform and looking at one of our videos that we're making about how to, so that we know all those little pieces, and the industry, but also listening to podcasts personally because I like to learn about all kinds of different subjects. I always, when I was traveling, my trick was to find podcasts either from people in the place or about the place or the history. Yeah, I do that with books too, but I started doing it at some point with podcasts as well. So yeah, I'll go on a spur. Like I'm on a big spur right now of reading Spanish authors. And then I was like, oh yeah, I need to find more. And with podcasts with Spain, it's even a little different of a piece because I'm trying to find ones in the language lately as I develop some of them I don't understand all of yet. But I've got to do this because this is going to be, I love podcasts. It's going to be a great way to learn. And then you hear, even if you listen to ones that are just general news kind of things or whatever, you pick up bits of culture and day-to-day stuff. So yeah, I listened to one of my favorite podcasts of the last year in Spanish, and I thought, okay, I am learning and developing because I could not have listened to this in Spanish a while back and understood everything that I did. It was so well done. I think part of that is also like seeking to understand people versus judging them. And you have to do that as a leader, both personally and professionally. But so many times, just a personal lesson I've learned is that we don't know people's backstory or what they're going through. Mm-hmm. They act like a jerk, and you're just like, oh, that person, and then you find out what's going on in their life, and you find out you have things in common. There's just so much more behind, under the peeling back the layers of most people. And as a leader, or just a human functioning in society, really, you have to be able to have that openness to know that, hey, I'm not always at my best either. And so I've got to sort of seek to understand and ask questions and try to, be there to listen if people want to share.
Well said.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's been hard, especially in times with a lot of conflict. I think it's been challenging, certainly for me personally, with just political opinions and things like that, and that's sometimes my tolerance level for certain things is like, oh, it's not, but then I try to say, okay, I may not agree, I may not be able to support someone, I may definitely speak out, but I also wonder, like, how did they come to that point? What's behind that? Because there's got to be something. There's not a lot of evil people out there. but they're spouting evil things sometimes. So what's going on there?
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Yeah, kind of what's behind that. I appreciate that. I imagine it's probably even more prevalent over these past couple of years as social media platforms have continued to evolve and podcasting platforms have continued to evolve, which gives people more spaces to espouse their views and connect with the community that maybe resonates with them. And so you are probably getting a little bit more exposure to those things. And so I can definitely see that.
Yeah, and I think leaders are tackling it a lot. I mean, there's so much now with people, with what people are putting out there creatively. It's also really important to be thinking about what you're, doing. Personal and professional intersect so much, but I think leaders are having to deal with, if my employee does something, does a podcast and they say something like this, how do I do it? And so that a lot of people are going to really be having to think about. And again, there's a difference between what your policy can be and not tolerating something that's not tolerable, or shouldn't be tolerated. But on like the more personal level, trying to get at maybe an understanding so that maybe we can get past, some things and we can kind of learn from each other, which is, not always easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's actually, you bring up a great point too, because I didn't even think about that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. How organizations are responding to the fact that these platforms now exist, and people, I think you called this out in the beginning, there's people who are producing content because it's a hobby, because it interests them, right? And so with the intersection of personal and professional bleeding into each other so much, it is likely that your employer or an organization gets exposed to some content that somebody puts out as a hobby, right? And it's like, this is just what I like to talk about in my personal life, but then you have to think about how does that impact the brand, and then at what point are you saying, while I may not personally agree, there's nothing from a policy perspective that would prevent us from, maintaining a relationship with this individual. Yeah, it's very nuanced. So I think you bring up a really, really good point. It's something that organizations are going to have to continue to respond to and evolve as the way that people consume entertainment, and then as access for creators continues to expand. Because I remember a couple of years ago, it seemed like a magic trick to be able to put out content and record yourself. You're like, man, how are they doing this? You need this whole machine and this organization behind you. You got to get lucky and make a break and know somebody at the radio station. And now anybody can make a decision on a whim to say, hey, I want to get my voice out there, and let me, buy a cheap mic, and let me turn on the camera, and I'm connected to thousands and millions. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It has so much potential. It's really cool. And I think with you guys doing the legacy of, leadership, it's so cool to think about just how many people can put out bits of their leadership, their life stories, the stuff that I come across, on Podbean with people from like all kinds of different places and sharing stories and all kinds of backgrounds and stuff like that. It has the real potential for that legacy piece, to really, and it's there. It's like it's out there in the world. To these, we can connect to things we never could before. We're seeing so many people doing. We have that live stream feature in our app. And we see people doing that. And they're usually small, they're like rooms, live rooms, and they're usually fairly small groups, but they're really engaged listeners and things. And what's really nice about that is that a lot of places, especially where like computer access is not as big, but mobile usage is pretty big. Around the world, we're seeing a lot of listeners from there because they're kind of more into live audio, they're more into the mobile thing, and so they don't access as much maybe of other types of content. And we've seen some really interesting, conversations back and forth, sometimes arguing, but, sometimes kind of coming to understanding from people from, different countries calling in, and so it's fun.
No, that's exciting. I love that point too, about the connection with people across the world. I mean, we're experiencing a little bit of that ourselves with our podcast and our audience. And you talked about the legacy, like stories that, may not have traveled, more than a couple hundred miles outside of Orlando at one point about our learning and our development and, leadership. We're able to connect with people across the United States and across the world and share those same stories. So, I love that.
Absolutely. So Shannon, then thank you so much, for joining us on this installment of Mentored by Adversity. We sincerely appreciate it. It was wonderful just to learn more about your leadership journey and hearing about connections, hearing about resourcefulness. And I really love that quote that you shared. The art of communication is the language of leadership. Which, of course, that is what we're all about in helping entrepreneurs and small business owners really develop themselves and develop their teams as leaders as well. So again, thank you for just spending some time with us and enlightening us, especially for our listeners out there. This was just part one, so be on the lookout. Part two is going to be coming up very, very soon. Just in a matter of days, we'll drop the part two where we take a deeper dive into specifically how Shannon and Podbean help companies to use podcasting, again, from a learning and development perspective, and adding that additional component and enhancement to helping their employees and their distributed workforce, especially in a day like today where most of us are working from home. How are you able to use this type of vehicle to get your message out and to help people learn new knowledge and develop new skills? So excited about that, and for our legacy leaders out there to hear about that one as well. Definitely, please, again, make sure that you like this particular podcast episode. We'd appreciate that very, very much. Leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you and just your thoughts about what we've learned from Shannon today, and again, specifically about some of those attributes that she's learned along the way that allows her to be the leader that she is today. Please show us some love, comment, like, and again, share with anybody out there that would find value from this particular conversation. If you want to reach out to us, again, you can do that by first connecting with us on Facebook within our Legacy Leader community. So if you haven't joined in the Facebook group there, please go ahead and do so. We're going live every Wednesday within that community. That's one piece, Shannon, that we haven't done yet, but is definitely on our to-do list, is going, doing the live podcast within the Podbean platform, especially with some of the benefits that you just mentioned. That it would definitely give us an opportunity to continue to allow some of those other listeners out there that maybe this is the only platform that they connect with us, and really having a little bit more engagement with the community. So we appreciate you reminding us about that as well. And then follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Legacy Leadership. You can follow myself at Coach_Jimmie G Jr. You can follow Devon at Leadership Docent. And then Shannon, definitely, please, how can our listeners maybe learn more about you or contact you, especially if they're very interested in learning more about how they can use the Podbean platform to enhance their learning and development strategies in their place of business?
Yeah, the LinkedIn is a big one for me, and I'm Shannon Martin Writes, so that's easy to remember. You can find me there. And then it doesn't have an easy URL, so I'd say connect with me, and then I can connect you to it. We have a group specifically for internal communications and L&D professionals about podcasting and related tools. It's not just all about podcasting, to share information, and we share resources and things. And I'm Shannon M at podbean.com, so if anyone wants to email me about or interview me, or email me about anything Podbean related or whatever. That's another way. So both of those I'm on pretty consistently, except not on the weekends, hopefully.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll definitely make sure that your information will be in the show notes as well. So again, if any of our listeners or viewers out there want to be able to connect with Shannon, we'll put her contact info within the show notes so that you have it. So again, please stay tuned for part two, but also be aware that the next episode of our Legacy and Leadership podcast, as we get further into the month of March, we're going to start to switch things up, and our focus is really going to be about mind mapping. And the first episode within that series is going to be focusing on 6 challenges that mind mapping can help you to overcome as an entrepreneur, or again, as a small business owner. So stay on the lookout. Stay tuned for that as well. So thank you again to our legacy leaders out there for listening, for watching, just joining in the conversation and continuing to journey with us along this path as we continue to bring on more guests in the future. We're excited for you to learn and for us to learn from our guests always. And so for our legacy leaders, I just want to leave you with this again. Remember, the life that you live is the legacy that you leave. So until next time, stay encouraged, and God bless, and take care of yourselves.
rage on that beat, going crazy.
You have just listened to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, hosted by Jimmy Gonzalez and Devon Watts. Thank you, and we hope that you live, lead, and leave a legacy worth remembering. Until next time.